Hi there, I'm Dan Weedin. Welcome to this week's brand new edition of Weedin Unleashed. Comes to you every Monday, or just about every Monday at noon Pacific time. Here we are today, November the 16th, 2015. Thank you for those of you who are joining me live, and thank you to those who are watching later on my YouTube channel. I hope that you will consider putting this on your calendar and taking part in the conversation. We usually have a few people watching and commenting and interacting. That's what all of this is part of doing. My Weedin Unleashed topic is most generally, and again will be today, whatever I wrote about on my Extra Points. My Extra Points is my weekly newsletter that comes out every Monday. And you can get on that, if you're not already, by going to danweedin.com and adding that to subscribing to the newsletter, or you can email me at dan@danweedin.com and I'll gladly add you to it. So today's topic is around the whole concept of perfectionism. Let me set it up. So I did my first pay-per-view for UFC fighting ever. I haven't really followed fighting since boxing back in its kind of the late heyday of the 70s and 80s. I enjoyed watching Muhammad Ali and George Foreman and the Spinks brothers and Sugar Ray Leonard and all of those guys. But I've kind of fallen away from it because boxing had fallen away. Well, I've become intrigued by Ronda Rousey and her dominance in that sport on the women's side, and really kind of becoming the most dominant sports athlete we have going right now. And so I decided I'm going to have a guys' night, and we're going to turn on the fight, so to speak, and watch. And so we did. And there were 5 bouts, and the Ronda Rousey Holly Holm fight was the feature at the end. And to say that it was a little bit disappointing, Ronda didn't come out very well. Holly Holm did, knocked her out in the second round, and ended her unbeaten streak. She was 12-0, the only woman ever to hold the bantamweight title. Broke that all up and shocked the sports world and beat her. And I did some searching out. Muhammad Ali lost 5 times in his illustrious career, so it does happen. But it made me think about something that I had heard her say on interviews. I heard Ronda Rousey say at one point that she believed that she was going to end her career unbeaten. That was her goal, that she's going to be perfect. She's going to end her career unbeaten. Well, that didn't last very long, because no sooner had she said that than she lost, and that blemish will at the very least always be there. And I realized that throughout sports, the quest for perfection generally ends in sadness. It ends in non-perfection. For instance, the last NFL team that went perfect were the 17-0 Miami Dolphins back in 1972. Hasn't been done since. And in fact, the New England Patriots came close. They went into the Super Bowl a few years ago against the New York Giants undefeated and lost. Kentucky men's basketball coach John Calipari a few years ago had his young team go in undefeated for a championship and lost. And his comment afterward was very telling. He said, "I wish we would have lost somewhere in the regular season," because I don't normally say that, but I think it would have taken the immense amount of pressure off of us. So when this whole Ronda Rousey thing came up at the end, I thought about it. I don't know how much of it played a part, but I had to think at least a little bit of it did. When you put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect, it's impossible to be, because it is impossible to be perfect like that. And you put so much pressure on yourself that you don't maximize the talent you have. It becomes a deterrent, an obstacle, a huge speed bump. And so I've worked with a lot of perfectionists. I coach and consult and mentor, and I've talked to many people who are perfectionists, and they are admittedly so. And here's the problem. If you're waiting to be perfect, if you're waiting for that perfect moment or waiting for your skills to be perfect, you're going to wait forever. I've talked to people who have books that are ready to go, but they're still tweaking them, they're still working on them, they're not perfect. Well, the book's been sitting there for a couple of years maybe. Get the book out. It doesn't have to be perfect. There will be errors in it, there will be typos, but who cares? Get the book out. I've heard people who say they didn't want to give a speech until it was perfect. Well, when is that going to be? Get up there and give the speech. Learn from the mistakes that you're going to make. I've talked to people who have thought about starting a career, a new career, whether it be in consulting, whether it be starting a new business, waiting for the perfect time, waiting for their skills to be perfect. They're still waiting. There's no time like the present, and speed and time is such a valuable commodity. I've talked about that on this broadcast, on these programmings before, is that the time that is taken in the pursuit of perfection that time is so valuable. You can't believe how bad that is for you. You're just wasting time. Alan Weiss, my professional mentor, has said on many occasions, if you're 80% ready, then you jump. The last 20% is dysfunctional. And he's so right. That 20% is waiting for perfection, is seeking perfection. Just like Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, somewhat made fun of that part of it. The irony is not lost on what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for to be perfect? The seeking out of perfectionism, the pitch perfect, that is perilous to all of us. I see Dave has kindly put up a question. I'm going to get to that in just a second, Dave. Let me kind of wrap up and summarize my thinking. Look, whatever it is that you do for a living, for a career, or in your life, the seeking out of perfection is going to hold you back because you put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect that you end up failing. I've worked with many people who are in a sales function, and when you're constantly trying to hit the curveball and trying to be perfect on it, you put so much pressure on yourself, it becomes obvious to the other person, and it becomes perilous to you. And so you just don't succeed. The question that I see Dave put up here really will lead in and transition into how you overcome this. And Dave asks, perfection is the enemy of good. How do you define good versus good enough? Great question, because what it does is it takes us to the solution for perfectionism. Good versus good enough. First of all, I guess it depends on the work that you're doing and where it stacks up. If you are a surgeon, good may not be good enough, and that doesn't define it. But let's just talk about it from an entrepreneur standpoint. And I'll use the example of putting out intellectual property. And intellectual property might be books, it might be booklets, it might be a newsletter, it might be creating a speech. It's something where your smarts, what's in your head, your intellectual capital, is being manifested into something where somebody can learn from it. I've seen too many times people say, well, it's not good enough. Well, why isn't it good enough? You're giving it away for free. You're putting it out there for the world. You're giving your opinion. You're giving your thesis. You're putting out some sort of value to people. Good enough is when you believe that you've looked at it, you've given it its due diligence, and there's nothing that you can do really that's going to significantly make it better. It is what it is. It's good enough. Put it out. You can't worry 3 days over a blog. Put it out. If you're writing a book, I'll use my example of just having finished a book. I wrote it, didn't self-edit it, had an editor go through it. She went through it, gave me the proofs. I looked through it. Okay, we're done. It's been written, it's been edited, it's been double edited, and then I finally actually had some readers read it. Some people who I trusted. We went through that. Okay, it's good. Are there probably some errors in there? Yes, I'm sure there are, but it's good enough. It's the goal is to get the information out. So Dave, I think the answer to your question is that it's good enough when you believe the greatest amount of value is in there for the taking. So if you're writing something, the value's in there. Spending an inordinate amount of time trying to make sure that everything's perfect, that's beyond it. It's good enough when you have the value that you're trying to put into place. Now, if you're thinking about making a leap into a new profession, maybe you're going into consulting, maybe you're going into speaking, maybe you're trying to make decisions on a new job, good enough is when you've done your due diligence and there's nothing more that's significant in having to make that decision. You've looked at the finances. You've looked at what you can afford to pay yourself when you're getting started, if that's part of it. You have the blessing of your family. You probably have your own factors. When all those are into place, that's good enough. The timing is never going to be perfect. That should never even come into play. There's no perfect time for that. But if you have the support of your family, if you have done your due diligence on the financial end of it, and you feel, I wouldn't even say comfortable. In fact, I think you need a little anxiety on some of these things to give you a sense of urgency. When you believe that you've got it good enough, and it's in your study, you feel it, it's good enough. You don't have to go over the top. I think good enough is when you get to that point where you say, gosh, this really feels right. This looks good. I'm ready to go. That's good enough. Too many of us will say, but I'm going to continue on trying to figure it out. Or I've got to make sure that last T is crossed or that last I is dotted, or that the people are going to have a place to sit. I don't know. There's so many different things. I think when you get to a point that you say, wow, this feels right, I put everything into it, that's when it's good enough. It's very subjective. It's really in the eye of the beholder. But I know that just from personal experience, something gets in your gut and you say, you know what, it's good enough and I'm ready to move on. In fact, the extra points I did, this topic, I found 2 mistakes in it. I found 2 misspell. One was a misspelling and one must have come about with autocorrect that I missed. Oh well, 2 words out of, I don't know how many words were there, 300 words. You got the gist of it. It was good enough. If I was a book, would I wanted that changed? Of course. But if it was missed, it was missed. So I think the big lesson to take out of this is that the pursuit of perfection, not going to work. You have to look at success rather than perfection. Is your objective being met? Have most of the questions that are the most critical been answered? Is it good enough for where you're putting it to help somebody and impact them? Those are the questions that you should be asking. Good question. I hope I answered that. I don't know if there's anybody else out there that has some questions. This would be a great time to put that in. I'd be happy to answer it. So let me do this as a final thought, because I've been talking here for, looks like just about 15 minutes and answered one of Dave's questions. The pursuit of perfection will hurt you. Look and set metrics that say, this is good enough. What I've put together here, whether it's a piece of intellectual property or it's the decision making into making big decisions, buying a house, changing jobs, starting a career, doing something like that, you're going to have a certain amount of due diligence. But when that's done, what is good enough to move forward? Where do you hit that 80% ready? Because you're never going to get to that 100% and you're not going to get to perfection. I believe it hamstrung Ronda Rousey in her fight. I believe it hamstrung the New England Patriots and the Kentucky Wildcats because there's so much pressure on being perfect that you can't even do good enough. Any other questions? Doesn't look like it, Dave. I hope I answered yours. These calls usually end up going about 15 or 20 minutes, and that's where we're at today. I want to thank you for watching. Stay tuned next week. I think each of my Mondays for the rest of the year are going to be solid, and we're going to be doing this. Tell your peers, your colleagues, your friends, come join us on Mondays at noon Pacific time, 3 Eastern, or at least make sure that you're watching here when you have a chance. I want to thank you for your time today. Wish you a great rest of the day, and I'll see you next week. Ciao.